The rain had been falling since dawn, turning the city streets into ribbons of silver beneath the gray morning sky. Daniel Carter stood outside the glass doors of Hawthorne Industries, staring at his reflection and trying to convince himself that he belonged there. His suit was clean, but it was old. The collar had been carefully pressed, yet the fabric had lost its original shape years ago. His shoes had been polished until they almost shone, though a small crease across the left one refused to disappear. He checked the time on his phone. 8:47 a.m. His interview was at 9. Daniel took a slow breath. Just get through this, he whispered to himself. One good job. That's all we need. He wasn't doing this for himself. He was doing it for his 6-year-old daughter, Emma. For the past 3 years, Daniel had been raising Emma alone. After his wife died unexpectedly, his entire world had changed overnight. He had become a father, cook, cleaner, driver, homework helper, nurse, and breadwinner all at once. He had taken whatever work he could find. Warehouse shifts, delivery jobs, construction work, night security, anything that paid enough to keep a roof over their heads. But now the small apartment they rented was becoming harder to afford, and Emma needed stability more than ever. That was why Daniel had applied for the operations manager position at Hawthorne Industries. The salary was more than double what he was currently earning. Health insurance, paid leave, a proper contract. It could change everything. Daniel pushed open the glass door. The receptionist looked up. Good morning. How can I help you? Daniel Carter. I'm here for the operations manager interview. The receptionist checked her computer. Conference room 4. Take the elevator to the 7th floor. Thank you. Daniel walked toward the elevator, but before he reached it, a young woman hurried through the entrance. She looked to be in her late 20s. She wore a simple beige coat over a white blouse, dark trousers, and low heels. Her brown hair was tied loosely behind her head. She carried no designer handbag, no briefcase, nothing that made her look particularly important. She paused near Daniel and glanced around. Excuse me, she said. Do you know where the executive offices are? Daniel looked at her. 7th floor. Thank you. She smiled. Daniel stepped into the elevator, and she followed. The doors closed. For a few seconds, neither spoke. Then the woman glanced at him. Interview. Daniel nodded. Yes. Operations manager. Her eyebrows lifted slightly. Really? Yes. She smiled again. I'm interviewing too. Daniel chuckled. For the same position, I suppose you could say that. Daniel didn't think much of the strange answer. He assumed she was nervous and trying to sound confident. The elevator doors opened on the 7th floor. Daniel stepped out. The young woman followed. He looked toward the reception desk. I think the candidates are supposed to wait over there. She nodded. Good idea. Daniel walked toward the waiting area. The young woman followed him. He pointed toward an empty chair. You should sit. They might make us wait. She laughed softly. You're probably right. Daniel sat down. She sat beside him. He noticed that she looked surprisingly calm. You don't seem nervous, he said. Should I be? Definitely. She smiled. Why? Because this company doesn't hire easily. You know that. I researched them. So did I. Daniel smiled. Then you know their CEO is supposed to be extremely demanding. Her expression changed for just a second. That's what I've heard. Apparently she notices everything. 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 The woman looked amused. I'll remember that. Daniel leaned back. I've heard she once rejected an executive because he arrived 3 minutes late. The woman nodded thoughtfully. Sounds harsh. It probably is. What if someone had a good reason? I don't know. Maybe she'd listen. The young woman looked at him carefully. What if the reason was personal? Daniel shrugged. Then you'd better explain it honestly. She smiled. You believe honesty matters that much? More than anything, even in an interview. Especially in an interview. For some reason, the young woman seemed to study him after that. Daniel didn't notice. He was busy reviewing his answers. Leadership, inventory control, supply chain efficiency, employee retention, crisis management. He had years of experience, but most of it wasn't from corporate offices. It came from places where mistakes meant losing money and sometimes getting people hurt. He wasn't sure whether Hawthorne would value that. The young woman suddenly asked, Why do you want this job? Daniel looked at her. Because I need it. She smiled. That's honest. I could give you the professional answer. What would that be? Daniel straightened his shoulders. I'm passionate about operational excellence and believe my experience would allow me to contribute to Hawthorne Industries' long-term growth. The woman laughed. Daniel laughed too. See, sounds ridiculous when I say it. Actually, it sounds very professional. It's not the truth. So what's the truth? Daniel looked down at his hands. I have a daughter. The woman's smile disappeared. She's 6. Her name is Emma. She's lucky to have you. Daniel swallowed. I don't know about lucky. I just try not to let her see when I'm scared. The woman was silent. Daniel continued. Her mother died 3 years ago. Since then, I've been trying to give her a normal life. School, friends, a warm meal, a safe home. He looked toward the windows. And lately, I've been failing at the last part. The young woman watched him carefully. You're behind on rent. Daniel gave a small smile. I'm not sure I should tell a stranger that. Fair enough. But yes. Then why this company? Because if I get this job, Emma won't have to worry about whether the electricity gets shut off. The young woman looked down. Something about her expression had changed. Daniel noticed but assumed she'd simply become uncomfortable. A receptionist appeared from behind the desk. Mr. Carter. Daniel stood. Yes, the interview room is ready. He glanced at the young woman. Good luck. She smiled. You too. Daniel walked toward conference room 4. The receptionist stopped him. Actually, Mr. Carter, your interview has been moved. Moved? Yes. The CEO requested to conduct it personally. Daniel's stomach tightened. The CEO? Yes. He glanced back toward the waiting area. The young woman was no longer sitting there. Daniel frowned. Where did she go? The receptionist looked confused. Who? The woman who was sitting there. The receptionist glanced toward the empty chair. I don't know. Daniel shrugged. Never mind. He followed the receptionist into the conference room. The room was enormous. A long glass table stretched across the center. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city. Daniel sat down. His hands were sweating. He wiped them against his trousers. Then the door opened. A man in an expensive suit walked in. Mr. Carter. Yes. I'm Richard Hale, Senior Vice President. They shook hands. Richard sat across from him. I'll be conducting the first portion of your interview. Daniel nodded. Thank you. Richard opened a folder. Your resume is unusual. I suppose it is. You don't have an MBA. No. You've never worked for a Fortune 500 company. No. You've spent most of your career managing small teams. Yes. Richard leaned back. So why should Hawthorne hire you? Daniel didn't hesitate. Because I know how to make things work when there isn't enough money, enough people, or enough time. Richard stared at him. Daniel continued. I've managed warehouses where one broken machine could shut down the entire operation. I've supervised people who were exhausted, underpaid, and ready to quit. I've had to solve problems without waiting for someone higher up to approve every decision. He leaned forward. I may not have the right degree, Mr. Hale. But I've spent 15 years learning what happens when systems fail. Richard slowly closed the folder. And what happens when people fail? Daniel paused. You help them before you replace them. Richard's expression changed. Interesting answer. The door opened. Neither man spoke. The young woman from the elevator walked inside. Daniel turned. His eyes widened. She wore no coat now. Her blouse was perfectly pressed. She carried a thin black folder. Richard immediately stood. Good morning, Ms. Hawthorne. Daniel froze. The woman nodded. Good morning. Daniel looked at Richard. Then at her. Then back at Richard. His face went pale. The woman walked toward the head of the table. Daniel suddenly understood. The receptionist. The 7th floor. The strange questions. The calm expression. The way she had watched him. The way she had asked why he wanted the job. She wasn't another candidate. She was Mr. Carter, she said calmly, taking her seat. Daniel swallowed. Yes, my name is Victoria Hawthorne. Silence filled the room. Richard glanced at Daniel. Victoria opened the folder. I'm the CEO of Hawthorne Industries. Daniel felt his entire body go cold. He remembered every word he'd said in the elevator. Every joke. Every complaint about her. Every time he'd told her how to prepare for the interview. He wanted the floor to open beneath him. Victoria looked directly into his eyes. You told me this morning that honesty matters most in an interview. Daniel nodded slowly. Yes. Good. She folded her hands on the table. Because I'm going to ask you some questions, and I don't want polished answers. Daniel took a breath. What kind of questions? Victoria leaned slightly forward. The kind that determine whether someone can be trusted with hundreds of employees. Daniel nodded. I'll answer honestly. I hope so. She opened the folder. Then she looked at him again. First question. Daniel prepared himself. Victoria's voice became quieter. You told me your daughter needs this job. Daniel's heart stopped for a moment. Yes. Would you still want this position if you knew accepting it would require you to make a decision that could hurt someone you care about? Daniel stared at her. I don't understand. Victoria closed the folder. You will. Daniel felt a chill run through him. Because suddenly he realized this wasn't a normal interview. And somewhere outside that room, a secret about Hawthorne Industries was waiting to change his life. Victoria slid a document across the table. Before we continue, she said, I need you to read this. Daniel looked down. The first line made his blood run cold. Confidential. Employee fraud investigation. He looked up. Victoria's expression was unreadable. I want to know, she said, whether the man who told me honesty matters more than anything is willing to prove it. Daniel stared at the document. He had come to Hawthorne Industries hoping for a job. He had no idea he was about to walk into a mystery that would threaten far more than his career.